Good morning, world. This is the NRNRC Black Table Talk Podcast. And today is Monday. I want to say to the world, happy Monday. And we're going to kick right off into this special edition that we have of the podcast. And before we do so, I will introduce myself as Travis Register, your host, and my co-host is,
I'm Damon Jones.
and my special guest to the right. Would you mind saying your name?
My name is Sulton. Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Ann Sulton. How are you today?
I am well, thank you.
All right, and to my left, who do I have?
Patrice Sulton.
Very familiar name. How you doing today, Patrice?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us.
All right, you're so welcome. It's our honor to have you. So we're gonna dive right off into this, and I want to start with our elder, with Miss Ann. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I hold the PhD degree in criminology and criminal justice from the University of Maryland in College Park, and I also hold a law degree from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Over the last 40 years or so, I've split my professional work in criminal justice and criminology issues, and the other half as a civil rights litigator, primarily litigating civil rights cases in federal courts across the country.
Mm.
Woo! You're a very accomplished and busy woman.
I'm pretty busy with a lot of different things. You know, I had hoped at the start of my career that some of the issues we were dealing with in the mid to late 1970s would not be the same issues that we're dealing with in 2024.
So, how was your passion awakened in you to be in this field?
Well, I realized early on, prior to completing my terminal academic degrees, that the opportunity to do that was built upon the backs of those who were on the front lines of the civil rights movement. So I knew from day one that after I obtained the skills that I needed to be a productive member of that particular movement, that I needed to focus my efforts on that, i.e. trying to improve the quality of life for everybody consistent with the guarantees embedded in the United States Constitution. So I see myself as a person with, in one hand, I am waving the American flag, and in the other hand, I am waving the United States Constitution. I want both to have life.
That's something we don't never hear, too often. You said the American flag in one hand, and then the American Constitution in the other hand. So how are they different? Because it sounds like they're different, but you having one in each hand.
The one is a symbol of the freedoms that we all should enjoy, and the way that we get there is to be true to the United States Constitution, the promises embedded therein. And if we do that, I think that we will have the world that Dr. King and so many others, W.E.B. Du Bois, so many others, Frederick Douglass, talked about for more than a century, we would actually enjoy. But we're still not there in 2024, and why I continue to be engaged in the discussions around, well, how do we make that Constitution come alive, because it seems to be sleeping right now.
You answered, because I had in my head the next question I was going to ask you, how do you think the Constitution is being upheld? But you already said it's sleeping.
I think there are too many people sleeping on making certain that it comes alive. It is a living, breathing document, in my view, but it requires active participation in public discourse on a daily basis to ensure that it has the oxygen needed to function properly for us as a tool to ensure that everybody can enjoy their life, regardless of their station.
So do you feel that this applies to, is the difference between black and white folks? I mean, are the white folks being served by this Constitution the way they're supposed to be? Or is it just, blacks?
Nobody is, because there's a social cost for both the victims and the offenders within the criminal justice system, and the ripple effect of that social direct cost ripples to all of us, whether or not we're participating in that particular incident. So we got to figure out how we can all be safe and how we can enjoy the promises embedded in the United States Constitution. I've read the constitutions of many nations around the planet, and I believe we got the best constitution on the planet. You know, I'm not running around asking for amendments be made, maybe to, clarify a couple of them, but I think it's a fine document. And if we can understand what it actually promises, figure out a way to get it, then I think life's going to be better for a whole lot of people.
Well put. Well, you got another follow-up question for that name?
Well, I do, but I'm just gonna go in. Like, do you feel that document was written for our people, meaning black people? Like, I'm a little lost on that. I feel like that document wasn't for us. Now, I guess there's ways that we could be included. But if the document wasn't written for us, it just seems that it doesn't apply to us. And it's like we've been trying to get around that document despite it not being for us.
It's a living, breathing document.
Right.
Right? And so each generation has an opportunity to shape its development.
Right.
Think of it as a baby. It's something that you have to nurture, take care of, make certain that, it survives. And, it's our responsibility to ensure that the promises embedded there and are realized for each generation, given the unique challenges that each generation will encounter. And the reason why I say that the Constitution is such a powerfully wonderful document is because it has planetary, global implications. That if you really believe in democracy, I don't care if you live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or if you live in Rio de Janeiro, or if you live in Harare, India, or if you live in New Delhi, India, or if you live in Sri Lanka, it resonates around the planet. It's so powerful. Wow. It ain't got nothing to do with just race or a single generation. This document is transformative for the entire planet.
Right.
So you got to read it. I read the United States Constitution every month. I've been doing it for almost the 40 years I've been practicing law. It is powerful. And every single time I walk into a federal court and I'm arguing for civil rights, employment rights, housing rights, business development rights, educational rights, every time I'm arguing it based on the Constitution, and I often win. Not always, but I often win.
Right.
And I ain't giving that up.
Right.
Come on now. Patrice, please chime in.
Sure. So as you can imagine, growing up, I heard a lot about how beneficial and sacred our United States Constitution is. And I think there's something remarkable about my mom's work as a civil rights attorney and my work as a criminal defense attorney being really the only spaces that you're actively litigating what the Constitution means and what it should mean going forward. But by the time I came of age and came out of law school on my own and got to have my own sense of what I wanted to do in this profession, I felt very committed to the notion that we can and must do better than the constitutional floor. And I think every state and every local and municipal government has an obligation before it to do better than what was promised to us hundreds of years ago. You look in the criminal space in particular, there are so many examples of what police, for example, are allowed to do, what prosecutors are allowed to do, what prisons are allowed to do under the Constitution that we can still curtail as a matter of law. By statute in our states, by statute in our municipalities, we can protect people from government overreach beyond what the Constitution guarantees us. And I think that is the mission for my generation, above and beyond just getting judges to agree with us that the Constitution means that Black people should enjoy protections too.
So we asked Miss Ann about how the passion was awakening her. How was it awakening you?
One memorable moment of obligation for me was walking into DC Superior Court as a law student to observe arraignments and get ready to defend people who were accused of crimes. And even when I do this now with students and interns and young lawyers, I sort of watch how long it takes them to make the same observation out loud that I made, which is this looks like slavery. It is appalling. And it's hard to leave that space without feeling energized around making the world better for the people who are being dragged through that system that is not just harmful, not just overly harsh, but is so obviously making us all less safe. The idea that we would call this safety to show people in shackles and chains was just really hard for me to digest. And I would say another critical moment of obligation came in 2020 when ideas that I read about from scholars like Angela Davis and others when I was in college entered the mainstream discourse about community safety. I never would have thought that people would talk about abolition on the nightly news. And so that made me feel like it was an important moment to take charge and to do something dramatically different. And that's how DC Justice Lab was born.
I love DC Justice Lab. I always say that. Always, yeah. I mean, you came from out of the shadows and you just exploded to where y'all are forced to be reckoned with, and you're notable. And the things that you do is strategic, it's clean, organized, well thought.
Highly commendable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I always got two hands up for y'all. Always. Miss Ann, through your freedom fighting with the civil rights, we often see like Damon and myself. We wasn't privy to be around back in those times. When y'all was part of the struggle and fighting for the rights of our people. And a lot of times we see a lot of violence that was inflicted on y'all. Did you ever experience any violence or it didn't have to be physical violence, but was it like verbal violence towards you?
Well, yeah, part of the terrain when I first started doing some civil rights work included, death threats to the NAACP office at which I was working and that was supporting the civil rights issue before us then. But you don't let that deter you. My approach was that if the people with whom I was discussing a violation of some civil right, if they started agreeing with me, then I would always get nervous. Because it meant that I had not gone far enough in demanding change. So I would use that as a barometer and do what W.E.B. Du Bois and some other people said when they initially formed the NAACP, was to agitate.
Stir it up.
Right. And so if your charge is to agitate, then that has a tendency for folks to call the office and, say some things that shouldn't be said. And we would just take those recordings and send them over to the local law enforcement and say, hey, maybe y'all need to take a look at what people are doing. Seems to me like that's not appropriate conduct. So it didn't go unreported. But, it's just par for the course that if you're going to step outside and encourage other people to step outside their comfort zone, there's going to be some pushback. And if you don't want pushback, then, sit on the porch.
Come on, Damon.
I wanted to turn it a little bit towards returning citizens because I know the work that, me and Mr. Register, we're returning citizens, and, we in the fight. We in the fight. And I tell Patrice and I tell my boss all the time, you know, that we're tools, man, and users. You know, we're here, we ready, we got the passion, users. So I just wonder how, you know, back in, you say the 70s, when you were really, you know, really enmeshed into the civil rights fight, how was returning citizens or, you know, former felons or whatever the terminology they you know, may have used back then, how were they being utilized, and how do you feel about our role in this fight right now? Because I know my role, but as a whole, I'm trying to bring more of us into this fight, and a lot of us don't know how to fight or don't know how to get into the fight, you know. And I mean, those of us that were incarcerated by the system, and now the ones of us that are coming home that want to get in this fight, you know, how do you feel about that?
Well, I took the approach that I had to reach inside the correctional institutions, inside the prisons, that I, as an individual, had to reach inside the prison and help prepare folks who I knew were going to be returning, so when they got here, they had some kind of bridge. For example, when I taught at Howard University during the early 1980s, I was there for about 4.5 years or so. I always had, as a part of my official teaching duties, teaching a course at Lorton Reformatory.
Oh, yeah?
And so I went out to Lorton every week and taught. I also taught in the prison in Baltimore, Maryland. I also taught at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. I also taught at Cheetah Correctional Institution for Women. So I've made a point to say, hey, you know, let's do some bridging before folks get out, so that we can begin to engage them in the discourse. Because I was teaching college courses inside, and, you know, to engage them and to try to let them know that, hey, you know, this is just one college course, but, you know, when you get out, you need to do some more so that you can get the critical thinking skills that you need to be able to think through strategically, you know, some of the ways that change can occur.
Right.
So that was the approach I used, and I did that for about 15 years.
I need to go on some more today.
Yeah,
for real.
for real. Yeah, because a lot of times what's going on, especially in the feds, is that they've cut any type of educational funding.
Especially anything along that lines.
I mean, to, you know, there's no vocation, yeah, especially along those lines.
Right.
Because all the time we never heard anything like that.
'Cause like I said, I've had the passion probably for like the last 10 years of my incarceration, but I didn't know the direction I was going to go. You know, I know I couldn't come out here and grab a gun and go fight that way. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it was no guideline of, you know. So now, like, when I'm getting enmeshed in this fight now, I'm learning everything new, when I could have been taught that a long time ago. But I mean, picture that.
Patrice, what about you? I asked Miss Ann about any type of opposition, whether it be physical or verbal violence that she had to withstand and endure. And I know it's a new time for you, but I'm pretty sure in advocacy work that you suffered, maybe not so much as physical, but some type of violence and threats and the mean eyebrow. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Sure. I mean, Twitter is, to me, reminiscent of the same phone calls I answered that were intended for my mom when we were growing up. And I agree. I think agitation is a really important goal. And I remember that being something that was hard to explain when I first started working with DC Justice Lab with people who do communications work professionally. They were like, well, it can't be that the goal is to irritate. Like, what's the goal? And I'm like, no, that is an explicit goal sometimes, is to agitate, and being able to explain that was important. But one thing that I want to point out is it really struck me when my mom told me that she'd taught classes in prisons in all these different places that she lived. And I remember asking, how is it possible that in all these different states you taught a class in a prison when that doesn't happen today? And she said, I told them if they want me to teach there, that they needed to let me teach a class in the prison, and they needed to give them credit. And it just would not have even occurred to me as someone who's been in academia for the last 10 years that I could step into my power in that way and say, this is what we demand, this is what we require. And if you think about the number of Black professors we have at the undergraduate level in our law schools, I mean, we have 6 law schools in this city. We don't need to wait for somebody to fund what we need and deserve. We don't have to wait for somebody else to give us permission to do what we know we need. We need to take that. We need to step fully into fully expressing our own power. We can't just like wait for someone to come save us. And I feel like that's a big difference between the way my mom went about her work and the way I see a lot of my peers go about social change this century.
Something jumped in my mind. What's the chances of this? Well, we just had a policy training course last week hosted by Miss Patrice Sulton, which was awesome. I can't even sit here and describe the amount of information and how far along it's done pushed me towards what I'm trying to do in this fight. But what jumped in my mind is that what's the chances, or has it been done, of getting a policy training class inside of a prison? And think how effective that could be.
When Joel Castone was still incarcerated, he had this idea for a civic engagement corner.
Right.
And I love that idea. And I think the idea of like doing political education inside the walls is a really important one.
Right.
And again, the one way that we can go about it is to say, dear Department of Corrections, will you please let us have some space? Will you please let us communicate in this way? And the other way to do it is to build your own channels of communication and make clear that the demand is there and that it's happening with their permission or without their permission.
Right.
But to see people actually elected into office from our jails, I think was
Right.
something really remarkable. To see DC become the 3rd place in the country, but the first Black place in the country to allow people to vote while they're serving time for felony sentences is extremely important. And so those pushes matter just as much as educating people about how to exercise their rights. We need to make sure that the rights are actually there.
Right. And those two examples could be used as the reason to show that this is something that is needed and that could work. Go ahead, Mr. President.
Recently, just Saturday, this past Saturday, there was a safety summit. And there was something that wasn't there last year when we went through our policy training academy. And by seeing once it actually happened and being a part of it, it was like, whoa, this is huge. And even though the venue, I think it should have been opened up to a little more than just the MLK 5th floor. And people all over the city needed to be a part of that. But can you explain a little bit about what that safety summit, how it came about, and what was the purpose of it?
We did our first safety summit on Zoom during the pandemic and decided to repeat it again this year. And at basis, the point of the safety summit is to coalesce around a pro-Black public safety agenda, to eliminate some of the false choices that people are being asked to make between safety and freedom. We know white people get to have both more safety and more freedom. Right. So we know they're not mutually exclusive. To break up the false choice between helping people who have survived harm or helping people who have caused harm, when we know that that's all the same community. It's all poor, Black, Native Washingtonians. Both categories are coextensive with one another. And so I said, we need a policy agenda that isn't focused on one specific stereotype of a group of people, but that is about Black people leading their own safety and freedom movement. And so Safe and Free DC was really born out of that. The Safety Summit is an opportunity for people to hear from people who are of very different backgrounds talking about the same shared vision of safety, which is that it's more than just the absence of harm. It's more than just the presence of punishment. It's about making sure that people have their unmet needs met and the tools that they deserve to survive and thrive that are made available to the people in this very same city who have money.
Ms. Ann, what does a safety summit mean to you?
Oh, it can mean a lot of things. I used to teach a course on emergency management. So that's where you make certain that each household has what it needs, not for 72 hours, but hopefully at least 10 days. So that's one concept of safety. You know, we know climate change poses an existential threat, and it is upon us now. So when we talk about safety, I think we have to talk about how are we going to have adaptive and reactive strategies available in place to move so people can be safe. Well, one of the things people don't talk about a lot when we talk about climate change is the instability in the social structures that occur along with the fracturing of the physical infrastructure, whether we're talking about major flooding event, a tornado, an earthquake. There are a lot of natural disasters that are upon us. It's not just a seasonal anomaly anymore. Climate change is occurring. So as we move deeper into realizing the challenges posed, we need to know that when people are, when mass numbers of people are fearful and don't have access to basic resources, that you end up with more chaos. So everybody becomes less secure. Everybody, and it's not just based on class or race. Everybody is going to experience a loss in productivity. Everybody is going to experience some level of loss of life, right? So climate change issues, I think, have to be considered if we're going to sit down and talk about safety. So, you know, every natural disaster is less impactful when people are well prepared. So I encourage people to be well prepared for what we know is coming, and it's on the near horizon.
Well, go ahead, Dan. I saw you getting ready to
Well,
say
just
something.
to switch it up a little bit again, I would ask you, Dr. Ann, if you could speak a little bit about your daughter and the work that she's doing, you know, from your perspective, and, you know, maybe even share a story that you may have about her, you know, that you think we might enjoy.
Well,
Because she's everything to us. So, you know, we all enamored by her, so we'd like to hear from the source.
oh well, there are many stories that I could tell about her determination as a young child. She played softball, and I'll never forget the look on her face and that of her teammates when they won the Little League championship for girls who I think were 6 years old or 7 years old. and I have
no
the
idea if that's
T-shirt
true.
to prove it. I still have that T-shirt to prove it.
Okay, all right.
But you know, there was a certain, you know, determination I saw where it was like, well, I'm going to get what I want if I work hard enough for it,
Right.
and if I'm paying attention to details. And so as a professional, one of my proudest moments, certainly in my professional career, bar none, is in 2016. On my left shoulder was my son, Attorney William Sulton, and off to my right was my daughter, Attorney Patrice Sulton.
Wow.
And we were all sworn into the United
Wow.
States Supreme Court at the same time.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Wow, that's
And,
great.
I mean, you talking about fruit not falling too far from the tree. Just drop straight down, to the basket.
Patrice, your turn.
Yeah.
We definitely want to hear what you got to say about your wonderful mother.
Well, I've had the opportunity to watch my mom in action. She worked from home a lot actually growing up. So I'm a person who, when people's little kids come flying into their Zoom calls and they apologize, I'm like, that's okay. It's really hard. I get it. She is a really outstanding trial attorney, and I've had an opportunity to observe the best in our profession, and she's really, really good. Right. And I got to watch my brother give a closing argument for the first time in December, and he did something that is one of her signature moves that I also do when I'm in trial. And it's hard as she gets closer and closer to retirement to think about that contribution and that skill set that's very unique being gone. I mean, I've watched her give an opening where a judge cried during her opening. And I know that particular gift was not passed down to the two of us, but made a big difference while it was in motion.
Wow.
Hey, then we mind getting her some tissue real quick. Here at the Black Table Talk, man. I mean, look, it's real. I mean, we keep everything, organic and all that.
Wow.
We ain't editing nothing out because this is us. So, man, this is good. We really appreciate y'all. And we talking about two different generations. We talking about a mother, and then what was in her. We talking about you, Doctor, and you passed on to Patrice, and what she's doing, and I'm like awestruck. I mean, to have your children be on your left side and your right side, and all three of you get sworn in at the same time. You can't make this type of stuff up. It's that's monumental.
That was a good day.
Yeah, I mean, is there a plaque on the wall at home or something like that? With the picture.
She has. She has.
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
This is a question that, because y'all being black attorneys and in a white driven entity and realm, has there been any type of pushback or pressure for y'all to sell out?
I'm really interested in your answer to that. I think maybe.
Well, there was for me at the beginning of my career. I remember a local white businessman coming to me and saying, "You are the ideal person we've been looking for. You're African American and female. You're light skinned. You have a PhD and a law degree and a pilot's license. You're perfect. If you will stop doing that civil rights stuff with the Madison NAACP, we will make certain that you are financially very comfortable." And I told the fellow that there is no price at which I can be bought if what you're talking about are paper dollar bills. I said, now, if you want to talk about, changing some of the things I'm interested in, then fine. But if all you're talking about is giving me money to get a bigger car or a bigger house, I said, I think I'm doing fine. The sister I help keep the insurance redlining from occurring on her home brought me a full-size smoked turkey. So my children going to eat tonight, so I'm going to be fine.
I like that. Your mother blazed the trail. Patrice, how you going to follow behind that?
Well, I think the point that she raised last is really interesting because I grew up, just enmeshed in a culture of hip hop, and I heard over and over again people say, you get rich and then you give back to the community, and that always struck me as a very different philosophy, not necessarily wrong, but very different philosophy than what I knew to be true with my own two eyes, which is that if you give back to the community will take care of you. And you will never want for anything. And I've seen people who get very wealthy lose it. I've seen people who are very wealthy be very unhappy. And so that theory of change just never really resonated with me, even though I like the music so much. Because you just, when you see something for yourself, you know it to be true in a different way.
Come on, Damon.
Well, every time you come to me, I switch it around because it's just so much I want to know from these folks about different topics. Something that jumped in my mind. I read a book while I was incarcerated by Sister Soldier. It was the biography she wrote. It's called No Disrespect, and I'm doing an endorsement for that because I feel that that's a must read. No Disrespect by Sister Soldier. But in the book, she mentions that the drug game robbed us of our best men, and she's speaking of blacks, of course. And, it resonated with me so much because at the time that I read that, I really sat and thought about who are our black leaders, and I couldn't name any. Like back in the 70s, of course, you had Malcolm, the work that the Panthers was doing, and, even before that. And so fast forward here today, 2024, the point that she was making is that a lot of our potential black leadership are caught in the criminal justice system. So I just wanted to know y'all perspective on that because that was so profound to me that, and when I talked about it with another person, they were saying that if you look around the unit we was in and the white folks that was in there is like child molesters, drug addicts, but then if you looked around at the black population, there was a lot of guys like us, and we were trapped. I'm doing 30-something years. Mr. Brothers is doing a life sentence. So, and I keep thinking about what she said in that book about how the drug game and the criminal justice system in itself is robbing us of our leaders. So I just wanted to get y'all perspective on that.
Well, I look at the concept of black leadership far different than I think many. I don't believe we have black leaders.
Right.
I believe what we have are people who are highly skilled in some areas who lend their expertise to what that discussion may be at the moment. But I don't think that they necessarily come in a particular color.
Right.
We have business leaders. We have education leaders. We have social justice leaders. We have people who lead in the news media space. So we have people who have different skill sets who are leading in their profession. And around some of the issues are issues pertaining just to those that might be of concern to African Americans. But I want to make it clear, nobody speaks for me just because they get on television and say, this is my view. That don't mean they speaking for me, okay? And that goes for Herman Cain when he was speaking. That goes for Ben Carson. That goes for Al Sharpton. You don't speak for me. You may be speaking on a particular topic, but when I'm talking about something else, unless you're expert in that field and I adhere to the theoretical paradigms that you're advancing, you don't speak for me.
I like that. I like that stance. I really do. I mean, because in a different type of arena, like Damon and myself come from, and us being from D.C. and us being in the feds, they had what you call shot callers, where you had one man or maybe a couple of men who represented that geographical location or that gang, and they were responsible for the group of men. So they were like the leaders, like we call shot caller. But for us in D.C., we didn't have that because we were men. So if you had Damon to say he wants to be a shot caller, okay, well, if he's a shot caller, who is he shot calling for? He doesn't represent everybody. He may be representing himself, and everybody may not even be willing to follow him.
Right. The way I look at it is that if I'm in a particular neighborhood, I don't care what city that neighborhood may be in, And if there is a person called a block captain in that neighborhood and they come up and tell me something, I'm assuming that they represent that neighborhood. But just because I hear some guy get on national TV and say something, don't mean that he talking about my neighborhood. Okay?
Come on, Patrice.
I'll just say there are a lot of brilliant people behind bars, and there are a lot of people responsible for so many people being behind bars who know that to be true. I used to think that the brilliance was being overlooked, but I think a lot of people know that to be true. And I think that's part of what makes the work that you're doing here at National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens so valuable, is that you have created not just an outlet for that brilliance, but programming and opportunity and a peer network, most importantly, for people who have had their potential hidden away longer than it deserved to be hidden away, to express it and use it and leverage it for not just their own betterment, but for all of our benefit. And so I appreciate so much what you're doing and for you having us on.
Appreciate y'all. Before we leave, we always have our guests have some parting words to give to the listeners. You know, one to grow on, a jewel to put into the jury box, or something like that. So
Let's start with Patrice and with the doctor.
okay, all right.
Well, speaking of jewels and jewelry boxes, everyone should support the National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens.
Noted.
Yes, I hope everybody really does listen and uplift these ideas and find ways to contribute to this cause. I just think it's very important, and I know that we wouldn't be able to do the other work that we're trying to do without you existing in our social change ecosystem alongside us. So thank you for fighting for us.
Thank you.
Thank you for fighting with us.
There's no doubt that if we want our communities to change for the better, that we cannot do without the voices that you hear in the National Reentry Network. That means rather than going and get your hair and nails done this weekend, contribute money to keep this cause going. The work cannot continue without adequate financial resources, and everybody don't need the hair and nail done this week. Take that money and invest it in your community. Check out their website. The National Reentry Network is here trying to make the community better, doing a good job, but it can't do it unless everybody step up to the plate and say, this is something we think is important, and this is how we show our belief that it's important. We're going to send y'all some money to help you do what you do.
Thank you.
All right.
This is the NRC Black Table Talk podcast, y'all. And we're thankful for our special guests who came on very short notice. Short notice like seconds. But they was ready and they did their thing. Please stay tuned and not only listen to this just one time, but maybe a few times, because there was a lot of powerful content in it. Like we always say here, we're going to sign out, but we're never signing off because there's always work to be done out there. Boots to the ground. Y'all do good.